How are we doing, Phil?
I'm doing well, thanks. Am I in the right place at the right time?
Yes, thank you.
Good.
How are you doing?
I'm
What's
doing
going on
well,
with you?
thanks.
What's the
What's that?
latest?
We have just come out with a new indicator to try and show how tough the supply chain crisis is. So,
Interesting.
yeah, something we call
So,
the ocean timeliness indicator, which is how long is it taking to actually get goods from Asia to either North America or to Europe?
and what are you seeing?
It has increased a lot. This is over the period of like the last 2 years. We think it's one of the better depictions of just how crazy this whole crisis has been.
So, what in terms of range from what was normal to what's now?
Hold on 1 second. I'll see if I can actually. There, you seeing this?
No, I haven't seen this. No.
Well, but you can see it on the screen, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what you can see is in 2019, it would take 40 to 50 days to get across from Asia to the US West Coast, closer to 55 days to get across from Asia to Europe. Those numbers are now over 100. I think it's 105 and 107.
Whoa. Yikes. So, how long do you see this lasting?
I don't think we're going to get this. I think the earliest we're looking, if everything breaks the right way to get stuff clear, is probably maybe the end of next year. But that's not a guarantee of that's when this will happen. That's the earliest this can happen.
Yeah.
I can explain why. I don't know if you want to do that when we're on discussing, but there is an explanation behind that. This wasn't a random number draw.
Yeah, we're going to unpack all that here in just a moment. Meanwhile, I will give
you want me to
people a
stop
little
sharing?
bit of context. Yes, please. We only have you for like a little bit, but we saw that what you showed us, the graph. Now, you said that you anticipate that this couldn't last longer than, or that it would start to clear up minimum during the summer. Is that correct?
End of the year.
End of the year. So this is you push back your estimation then.
Yeah, we have been pushing it back. So, and there's a rationale behind this, which is you have it's a pretty cyclical industry. And so you have an industry that was built to handle peak capacity. Peak capacity usually comes end of the summer into the fourth quarter as people are trying to move goods into position for holiday shopping, for example. One of the things that means is there's actually not that much of a difference between saying the summer and the end of the year, because you either get things clear before the next peak season or after the next peak season. It's very unlikely that in the middle of a peak season, things are clearing, because we also have a backlog. So really, to see things calm down a lot, you need to have a period where demand lets off, and it lets off enough that you've got that extra capacity to clear the backlogs. And we think, first, we're not seeing much sign of demand backing off. And second, there's enough of a backlog that even if it did start to do that, very unlikely before the end of the year, it's enough that you sort of sound the all clear.
So then on the supply side, what do you see changing that gets you into this kind of thinking?
It's really so, and let me reiterate, this is not a prediction that we will be fine by the end of the year. That's the earliest we would see something. Fundamentally, I'm arguing that this is a demand-driven problem, that it's that we've had a burst of demand, that the system that was supposed to be at peak for a few months a year has been above peak capacity for over a year and a half. And that's what's driving this. And that's why we've got big backlogs built up. That's why we have congested ports where there's barely any room to put an empty container. So you can take, a full container out. So what we've seen is that's just continued. And so the backlog increases, demand does not abate. And then you sort of get past one season and say, well, I don't think there's enough time to have this clear out by next summer. Plus, you can look and see there are some real challenges looming on the horizon. A very notable one is that the West Coast ports are going to be conducting labor negotiations. And those could well be contentious. And any kind of slowdown there will prolong the difficulties or exacerbate them.
What else do you see as sort of things to watch?
I think the biggest thing and the thing that we're focused on is what's happening to people's preferences for goods. That one of the real oddities of this whole time has been, and I say oddity in the sense of a break from past norms, the extent to people's tilted towards goods and away from services. That clearly had a lot to do with the health situation. So one of the things that you watch is what happens to the health situation. There's, you could hypothesize that when we get to a better, happier health situation where the virus is not dominating our lives as much, maybe people revert back more to going to, gyms and trips and concerts and restaurants. Those, of course, use goods somewhat, but not as intensively as just goods purchases. So that would be the kind of thing that would be what we talk about as an easing of demand. It doesn't have to be that the overall economy demand has gone down, but the amount of it that gets directed towards a demand for goods is a key part. And so key indicator, one of the things is watching what's happening with health, and clearly having a new, concerning variant is not a step in the right direction.
How much has consumption shifted from services to goods?
I think it is, don't hold me to the exact numbers here. If you looked at personal consumption expenditures, you were something like 31% goods, and we jumped to like 34 or 35% goods, which is a fairly big move, especially when you remember that you have a system that doesn't have a lot of elasticity of supply built into it. You can't really get a lot of boats online or expand port capacity a great deal. You can do some stuff at the margin, and people have been. But that tilt was in the US, but you've actually seen this tilt around the world. Actually, the US is the second biggest. The UK was actually the biggest in terms of this. But OECD we did some research looking at 25 countries. I think 23 of them had a notable tilt towards consuming more goods and fewer services, with the UK and the US as the extreme to the extent of it. You can find this stuff, by the way, on flexport.com/research. And we're tracking, we actually not only watch where that tilt has been, we forecast that out a few months using our data and this post-COVID indicator. And so far, there's no sign of let up.
So even when folks feel better about health and everything, you're saying that it roughly stays the same?
As
in the short term,
we've seen movements. So I sort of scale this all in this post-COVID indicator, where if you call, normal zero and the elevated demand for goods, in the summer of 2020 was 100. So you put it on that scale. This spring, we were at something like 165. So it sort of tilted even more towards goods. At the moment, we're somewhere around 120. And we see that lasting pretty much through the end of the year, which is about maybe into January, that we can see a couple months ahead. So far, the government's only released data through October. But it's wavered, it has moved around, but it's still stayed very heavily tilted. So if you want to paint the picture of what does a sort of reprieve from the supply chain crisis look like, I can tell you what it looks like. It goes like this, that for one of two reasons, demand lets up. So one reason is people still have a high level of demand, but they shift it back towards services and away from goods. The other thing that happens is there's something in the economy like the Fed raising interest rates or a pullback of some sort where overall demand goes down. But this gets to a level where the system is not at capacity and it has some spare capacity that it clears the backlog. And there has to be sufficient time for it to clear the backlog before you get to a new peak period, which almost ensures that you will be at capacity again. That's when we're trying to set a date for when might we see things clear. That's what we're trying to figure out. And you're hoping in there that there's no more interruptions of the sort that we've had where you saw like a ship stuck in the Suez Canal or major Chinese ports shutting down for a period, which we also had. So that's why it's not a precise forecast, but so far we haven't even seen the first step. We haven't seen the demand falling away.
So how does inflation play into all of this? I know that a lot of folks are watching that very, very closely, hoping that that doesn't get its own momentum. So you see this as a demand-driven problem, but a lot of when you talk to, execs from retailers, they're saying like, look, this is ultimate, these are costs that we've got to be, it's higher supply chain costs now, and we've got to be passing that on to our consumers. And it's a fine line between getting our promises to our consumers right and getting our promises to our investors right. And how do we navigate that except, try to not pass on too much cost? So, there are all these things at the company level that they're thinking through, and they characterize it primarily as a supply problem.
Right.
Now, what's funny is that I'm going to point out you spent time at American Enterprise Institute and you served in Republican administrations. First time, I would have expected the supply side answer from you.
Well, I think so. So look, let's be clear. As far as they're concerned, there's a whole the companies, and there's nothing wrong with what they're saying. There's who's supplying our goods and what price pops out of all of this. So which market are we talking about? They're seeing what are my costs of bringing goods over. They're absolutely right. Those things have skyrocketed. You see, to be more precise with this, you would see a container that maybe cost $1,500 to move across the Pacific before, now sometimes costing $20,000. So really, now that's not the norm, that's sort of a high end, but very substantial increases in prices. So they're right. I think what I'm talking about with supply and demand is that market for who will bring goods across the ocean to where they're supposed to go. And on that, the problem is the supply, the capacity to do that is relatively inflexible. If you're an ocean carrier and you say, wow, I see this really high demand, I think I'll order a new ship, that can carry, 10,000 TEUs, 20-foot equivalent units, the container size. It's years before you would get that ship, right? That it doesn't happen overnight. So this is not a failure to believe in, how can you adjust supply? And it's the same thing with the reports. I know you're just tweaking me on the Republican stuff, but the thing we have to realize is actually one of the interesting things, people actually have brought more ships online. You have seen, it's not that the market response doesn't work, It does. The challenge is that at the same time, you look off the coast in LA and you've got something like 80 ships waiting out there. And so even if you brought some more ships, those ships that are out there, they're not moving goods across the ocean. They're floating warehouses, right? They're not actually moving because they're stuck. And so, some of our ocean team at Flexport, they've talked about effective capacity versus sort of nominal capacity. The nominal capacity is how many ships are there. Then there's how many are free to actually be moving stuff at the moment. And so we've seen a supply response, but given some of the bottlenecks, you haven't seen the effective capacity increase that much. So let me come back to the inflation. And also you raise a good point. I think where there was a real distinction between my kind of argument you could see another version, which is essentially what the Fed was saying up until very recently, where they were talking about this sort of being a transitory problem. And there was a way of seeing this issue, which is, I sort of derisively refer to it as the who forgot to flip a switch problem, right? That somebody did something wrong. So, and we've seen examples where there was something wrong, like, a ship wedged into the Suez Canal. So if you thought that was sort of the heart of the problem, that, okay, well, we've gotten it free, it takes a while to get set, but then we're all fine, then you could think they'll fix it and it will all get better. If you thought instead that the core of the problem is you have a system that's running well above capacity and that's putting on huge strains, then you come to a different conclusion, that this is not a quick transitory problem, it's something lasting. And that seems to be where the Fed now is, given some of the testimony this week of Chairman Powell. So, and I agree. I think it is a more lasting problem. So, how does this feed into inflation? You described it, that if somebody is bringing over goods and they used to get, when they made these plans, they were thinking about $1,500 a container, and now they're thinking about $15,000 a container. Those costs have to go somewhere, right? You could try swallowing them a bit. It's hard. Most people don't have margins that big. If you could try passing it on. Meanwhile, you've got, if you look at sort of the other side of the same coin, you've got stores that, they don't have the warehouses in the back room stocked the way they would like. If you look at indicators like inventory to sales ratios, they've gotten very, very low. And what that means is, we just a week or so ago passed Black Friday, where traditionally you get these doorbuster sales, come on in, clear our shelves. Well, stores aren't that anxious to have people clear their shelves because they can't restock from the back. And so if you do a big sale and you clear the shelves, then they're not going to have anything there for the next few weeks, for those of us who don't get our shopping done early. So how do you respond to shortages like that? Well, you don't cut prices, which in effect means prices are higher than they would otherwise be. And so there's one round of these things, which is that very immediate, hey, look, if I just have, 10 of these things left, and that has to last me for 3 weeks, I'm either going to raise my prices or certainly not lower them. That's a source of inflation. That's another version of the same. And I also have to accommodate these costs that the stuff's coming in. A big question for inflation and how inflation matters and how this plays out, and is this lasting or does this recede, is what happens with people's expectations. And to me, the sort of cleanest way to think about this is, if your boss comes and offers you a 5% raise, do you say, thank you, I feel so loved? Or do you say, 5%? That doesn't even keep up with inflation. If you want to show that you really care about me, let's start talking 10. Do that 6.2% CPI inflation, and then what are you offering me on top of that? And we've actually seen things like this. I think it was John Deere just had sort of a strike in contract negotiations where they offered expectations in, and then a raise gets to be not the sort of nominal 5%, but give me 5% on top of what inflation's going to do. That starts building in sort of wage price spirals. And then you've got that much more money coursing around the economy, and that puts its own price pressures on. So one of the things you can look at, if you look over the last, since the early 1980s, it's been this gradual push by the Fed to get inflationary expectations out of the economy. It's not a science as to when they return, but the longer we go with sort of prices increasing and notable inflation numbers, the bigger the risk that people start building this in, and then it's hard to get out.
You think, how can you tell if it's starting to get in?
It's things like people holding out for, it's when do people start figuring inflation into their planning and noting it, and things like, what am I willing to work for? Is this a good thing to have a 3-5% raise, or is that a terrible thing? because it's a pay cut. And are they seeing things that way? I think we've had quite a while now where inflation was sufficiently low that people didn't really have to think about it. It's true, if you don't get a raise for 10 years and you have 2% inflation, you will ultimately, start to see that you're getting less in real terms. But that's nowhere near as striking as if you think there's going to be 6% inflation, when ignoring that for a little while makes a big difference.
Right. So if it lasts into next year with all of these supply problems and demand staying high, do you feel like if demand stays constant where it is right now, and there's not like anything unexpected in supply, that because inflation is a rate, right? Two things got to be happening: time to be ticking, and the something going up. So do you feel that the risk of inflation increasing, or like, what do you?
I think there's a very real risk of it. There's certain things which people will point to where they think that there might be an easing off. So, how much of this is driven by energy prices, and, could they fall back? And, people bought a lot of durable goods and maybe they get satiated that there's only so many sofas you can buy. And then after a while you have nowhere to put them all. And so you stop buying sofas. There can be some of that. I would look at this though, as even if you cut out things like food and energy, you're still seeing prices rising at a pretty healthy clip. And the other thing to remember is, if you just go back to the absolute basics of monetary policy, what do? We used to talk not about like how many bonds the Fed was buying, but what was the policy interest rate. And at the moment, that's been sort of near zero, and it has been for quite a while. But that's a little bit deceptive, because that's the nominal rate. What really matters to people and to businesses, if you're talking about how costly is it to borrow, is you subtract inflation away from that. And that gets you to a real interest rate. And the real interest rate has been negative for quite a while now. So we're adding a lot of sort of monetary stimulus when we already have a lot of inflation. So we're still stepping on the gas. I think that's part of why you're seeing the Fed say, hey, we're going to accelerate this process of buying fewer bonds, which was the precursor to raising interest rates. But we're still in a very, very accommodative monetary policy. Another thing to remember on this is, traditionally, monetary policy is not an overnight way to stop these things. When you would ask sort of people at the Fed or wherever, hey, how quickly does monetary policy work? The answer you would get, the cliche phrase was, with long and variable lags. So I'll translate that, because I'm not a monetary economist, say 18 months to 2 years. There was a Fed chairman in the 1960s who said the job of the Fed was to take the punch bowl away just as the party was getting started.
Right.
And the problem now is the party is well underway. People are very happy. They have big sloppy smiles, and the punch bowl is still there and is being replenished.
Why?
I think there's a couple of reasons for this. One, well, actually, I'll boil it down to one and talk about a couple facets of it. The pandemic. That we had a pandemic which started with this extraordinary drop in economic activity. So a very sharp recession, shocking numbers. And I think the Fed said, we're going to throw everything we have at this. So interest rates are already very low, but we're just going to go out and buy a huge amount of bonds. We're going to open all these facilities. We're not going to get caught having underdone this. There was a question, which is, all right, when you get a huge shock like that, how does it play out? Was it like the global financial crisis, where you, for example, see unemployment shoot up to 10% and then over a period of years gradually work its way down? That was kind of the norm. What we saw instead was unemployment fell very, very rapidly. So we're now at a level of unemployment, what are we, 4.6 or something like this? We're at a level of unemployment, which traditionally has been thought of as a very low level of unemployment. So this made it all very hard for the Fed to see, have we recovered? The other thing is, you can look, and if you want to say, have we recovered from the pandemic? You can use two different measures that the Fed might use. The Fed is supposed to look not only at price stability, but full employment. So you can say, well, how close? They can look at price stability. That's a little worrisome. Where are we with full employment? You can measure this two different ways. One thing you could ask is, well, what's the unemployment rate? Oh, the unemployment rate actually looks very low. I guess we've recovered. Or you could ask, how many jobs did we have before the pandemic? And where are we in terms of recovery? Oh, if you ask it that way, then we're millions of jobs short. And there's a lot of people who haven't returned to jobs. They may not show up as unemployed because they're not looking for work, but that's the sort of latent army of workers who are ready to jump back in. That's been part of what so you asked, how did we get to this spot? That's been part of what's been so confusing. Is there a latent army of workers, or is there not a latent army of workers?
That was my final thing that I was going to ask, and we've only got a couple of minutes to get into it. We may, all right, let's extend it just a little bit. All right. Everybody's asking about what the Great Resignation is all about. Everybody's, offering ideas because no one gets high fives for saying they don't have any ideas. But from your perspective, what do you think that this is all about? Is it psychological? Is it truly a rejection of crappy jobs the way that they were, interfacing with, angry people with red hats on and coughing at them? Or people just being rude about anti-vaxxing and things like this? Or is there something else going on, which is that folks are wanting to be working from home, and so they're willing to take a pay cut, work for a call center, and do it from home?
It can't be exclusively the latter, because what we know is that if you look at things like the employment to population ratio, it's down. So it's not just that these people switch to sort of different, more accommodating jobs. Some people just stop doing jobs. And so that's part of what we have to explain. And it's challenging. I don't know that we have a complete explanation. There's a bunch of things which are suggestive. I mean, we had wrenching changes, and wrenching changes are hard. It's much easier if you get like gradual movements from one sector to the other. We haven't had that. You've had things where people lost their childcare, for example. And so you see women unable, it doesn't have to be women, it just has turned out, I think, often to be women, who say, I can't afford to be in the workplace right now. I'm going to have to take time off. I got to look after my kids until they can be going back to school regularly.
I'll add to that. We asked a ton of women to speak in this summit, and for the first time ever, like, I looked at the final list of speakers, and women came back, and they were, it wasn't like, alarms going off like, hey, but we for the first time ever, we got called out about it on LinkedIn, chatted with them, and I said I would bring it up in the summit. This is a serious thing.
It is.
It is very serious. We had a lot more women planned. We invited more women than men to speak, and they could not confirm, make it happen. And I have to assume that in at least a few cases, that most of the cases I would assume here, that something like that was involved.
So I think that it is a very serious thing. And if you look at things like labor force participation, that we were knocking ourselves back into like the 1970s. And the big change we had from the 1970s was often that we had made progress in incorporating women into the workforce. And I think this has been a serious setback on that. The question is,
the thing that blows my mind here is,
how long does it last?
How long does it last? Who's buying all this stuff? How can you have growth and this much demand increase and yada 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 with people getting pulled out of the workforce? Therefore, you should see less demand from that. You've got people not working, and they're not doing jobs the way that you said. What on earth is going on with this bananas economy right now?
So you're asking a question which is near and dear to an economist's heart, which is sort of follow the money. So who's funding this whole thing, right? Now the interesting part is if you look at the national data and you look at personal income and outlay and expenditures that the Bureau of Economic Analysis tracks, and you look at where we were in, say, February or March of 2020, every single month since then, personal income has been above the level it was then. Part of what happened was, in addition to the Fed having a response, we had a very big fiscal response. We had things like the CARES Act and expanded unemployment benefits and other things where we actually pumped money into people's pockets. And I'm not just speculating that that's what drives it. If you compare what happened to personal income and you also then graph out what happened to government transfers, almost all the moves are in parallel. That you can see that this is where this is coming from, but we put money in people's pockets, which let them keep buying. I'm not saying that was good or bad, but it did mean that that's why you normally would have thought everybody leaves their jobs, they don't have money. That's certainly going to put a crimp in demand, not to mention being very unpleasant for the people. So this addressed that somewhat. And so you have, and not only that, but a lot of that additional money that was pumped in, you can also see in the statistics, a lot of people saved it, which means at the moment, it won't be the case that the moment that the money drops off from the government that, oops, look, I'm really hurting, I got to get back to work. If you have savings that can carry you, but that's it. I don't have a full-fledged, well, secretly in their mind, they're all planning to return to work 6 months from now, after the last variant has run its course. I don't know. But this was a lot of what the Fed has been struggling with, because their hypothesis was, here was this group of the sort of army of latent workers who were going to come back, and they were going to come back before too long, and that's what was going to keep things like wages from being bid up too much, and we haven't seen it.
One final question, and in the meantime, I am going to put on my sweater and invite up to the speaker circle here Allison Wood and Cindy Elliott.